Hello. Just to clarify, hello is a word that wasn't used very much until the telephone was invented 140 years ago. With the proliferation of the telephone, people found themselves in a new situation where they had to have conversations with people who weren't there, who they couldn't see, and they had to initiate the conversation with them by picking up the receiver and greeting somebody who they didn't know who it was because they didn't have caller ID 140 years ago. So they needed a word to start the conversation. Alex Bell, who invented the telephone, suggested ahoy would be a good word. That didn't catch on. Somehow hello won the day. Everybody started saying hello when they answered the telephone. That then spread out into the wider community and is used frequently in lots of occasions. My recollection from when I was a small child is that my mother would frequently answer the phone with the words, "Are you there?" That might just be an indication of how reliable our telephone system was at the time. When you're meeting somebody face to face, the formal English greeting is, "How do you do?" where the second "do" can be translated as prosper or fare or thrive. It's basically an inquiry about somebody's health, except it's not a question. In formal English, the formal response is, "How do you do?" So one person says, "How do you do?" and the other person replies, "How do you do?" They don't even get the chance to put in a bit of inflection and say, "No, how do you do?" because that would be very informal. It's all a bit weird, really. As people moved west across the Atlantic in North America, "how do you do" became "how'd you do," and "howdy do," and "howdy doody," and just "howdy." Or if you were a North American Indigenous, you would greet a paleface with the word "how." "How do you do" is something that you don't hear all that often anymore. People are more inclined now to say, "How are you doing?" which is actually a genuine question. It's usually an inquiry about your health and your general well-being, and you respond to that by saying, "I'm doing fine, what about you?" In some parts of the world, like Australia for example, people are less likely to say, "How are you doing?" and more likely to say, "How are you going?" And there's a subtle difference there. "How are you doing" is about your current situation. How have you been? How are you feeling? "How are you going" is about whether your life is progressing the way you want it to. It's about, let's not dwell on the past, what's the future looking like? In Australia, it's all about progress. It's about moving on. It's about advancing. Of course, when an Australian speaks English, what comes out his mouth is something different. I think what happens is that an Australian will form a sentence in their head which is in English, but as it's processed down through his larynx and comes out his mouth in speech, it goes through some kind of straining system that filters out all the syllables. So what comes out is something that I like to call Austrain. For example, instead of saying "good day," an Australian will say "g'day." And when it comes to a greeting like "how are you going," what we actually hear is "how you going." One day when I was living in Perth in Western Australia, I was going down a stairway one day and somebody else was coming up the other way. He was in a bit of a hurry. He didn't have time to stop and chat, but he did feel he needed to say hello on the way past. So his intention was probably to say, "How you going?" But of course that went through the syllable strainer, and what came out his mouth was this. He said to me, "Ngan." And I'll just repeat that so as you can get the full understanding of it, and I swear this is true. He said to me, ngan. The weird thing is, I understood him. I replied, I'm good, yourself? And I carried on down the stairs, and as I was going down the stairs I thought, wow, that's weird. I understood what he said. I must have been living here for too long. So there's a path that leads from how do you do to ngan. I hope I've taken you the shortest possible route down that path. If you're studying English as a foreign language, I hope that makes it a lot clearer for you. Basically, if you're greeting someone face to face, anything that seems to fit between how do you do and ngan will be acceptable. If you're talking on the phone, say hello, not ahoy.